Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. Twin suns bathed Alpha Omega 8 in golden light, its biodomes gleaming like glass fortresses against the endless void. Within them, crops stretched skyward, machines hummed in perfect rhythm, and children's laughter echoed through thriving streets. A triumph of human ambition, carved from the stars. Until now. The alarms screamed, "Lieutenant Garth!" Officer Barry Osmond burst onto the deck, breathless, his face drained of color. "Enemy ships detected! It's the Varnax!" Garth spun toward the tactical display, his gut twisting. The Varnax fleet surged forward like a tidal wave of darkness, jagged obsidian vessels gliding through the void in perfect, predatory formation. They didn't just advance, they encircled, shifting like a pack of starborn predators closing in for the kill. Their bioluminescent hulls pulsed in eerie unison, as if the fleet itself was alive. Watching, waiting, and they were closing in fast. "Send a direct message to Admiral Nelson, now!" Garth barked. The first orbital bombardment struck like lightning. Explosions ripped through the colony, sending shockwaves through the ground. Firestorms erupted as the biodomes cracked apart, their reinforced domes melting under the unrelenting energy blasts. The lush fields below turned to blackened craters, entire residential sectors vanishing in an instant. "Defensive turrets engaging!" Osmond shouted. The station's automated defense turrets roared to life, unleashing streams of plasma fire into the void. A handful of enemy ships buckled under the assault, their burning wreckage spiraling into the planet's atmosphere below. But it wasn't enough. "They're targeting the main reactor!" Osmond's voice cracked over the alarms. Another explosion split the horizon. The colony's central power grid detonated in a blinding inferno, sending plumes of debris and fire spiraling into the sky. "We're losing everything," Osmond muttered. Aboard the HMS Havoc, Admiral Nelson stood firm, his gaze locked on the tactical display, Garth's transmission reverberating through the bridge like a ghostly echo. His men were dying. His colony was burning. The bridge was a tomb of silence, officers frozen as the weight of reality settled like a vice around their throats. The flickering tactical display painted a grim picture. Alpha Omega 8's defenses crumbling under relentless fire. Nelson's gaze remained locked on the holomap, his mind racing through battle scenarios, each risk, each sacrifice, each path to victory. He exhaled sharply, decisions settling like steel in his chest. "We draw them in," Nelson said. "Let them believe we're retreating, then strike where they least expect." Commander Dominic Moreau gave a curt nod. "Agreed. If we execute it right, we'll break their formation and crush them before they can regroup." "Then you lead the strike," Nelson ordered, his voice steady. "Go." Meanwhile, at Alpha Omega 8, Garth assessed the situation. No enemy soldiers to fight, only the silent, merciless rain of destruction. The colony was being erased. Then, the station was hit. A brilliant, searing explosion rocked the structure, sending bodies and debris flying as fire engulfed entire sections of the command deck. The station's reinforced hull groaned, metal twisting under the sheer force of the blast. Warning sirens blared in a chaotic chorus of alarms, flickering emergency lights casting erratic shadows across the shattered control panels. Osmond coughed, gripping the terminal with shaking hands as smoke filled the room. "We're losing everything," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Garth forced himself upright, blood trickling down his forehead from where he'd slammed into the bulkhead. His ears rang, but the urgency in his gut cut through the haze. "We're getting off this station. Now." He grabbed Osmond by the shoulder and dragged him toward the emergency evac bay. All around them, crew members scrambled toward the row of escape shuttles, panic barely held at bay by sheer discipline. The emergency lights flashed red, illuminating the fear in their eyes as they clambered into their pods. "Launch procedures engaged," one of the officers shouted, sealing the hatch on a nearby shuttle. A massive tremor shook the station as another direct hit slammed into the core structure. Fire burst through the bulkheads, ripping through the deck like a dragon's breath. The last pods ejected from the station, streaking toward the black void, just as the station's core finally collapsed. A final blast tore through the heart of the command center. Garth and Osmond barely made it through the last set of blast doors before the station detonated. They stumbled into an emergency evac craft, a sleek, two-man escape shuttle designed for last-minute evacuations. Garth slammed his hand onto the launch controls, overriding the safety protocols. The shuttle detached just as the station erupted behind them. A deafening shockwave propelled the escape craft forward, its systems blaring red from the turbulence. Garth gritted his teeth, gripping the controls as they tumbled end over end through the debris field. Through the viewport of their emergency craft, Garth saw the other escape pods consumed in a single, hellish fireball. Osmond shouted as the emergency lights flickered, the ship spinning wildly. "We're caught in the blast radius! Brace!" Garth yelled. Then an impact rocked the craft. A Varnax shockwave cannon blast caught them, sending their systems into a total failure. The power flickered once, then died completely. The escape pods spinned out of control. Inside, Garth and Osmond could do nothing but watch as oxygen levels dropped and the cold void of space closed in around them. Their bodies slammed against the restraints as gravity failed, the ship adrift in a sea of destruction. Then, a burst of light. A fleet emerged from hyperspace. Humanity's vengeance had arrived. The moment his fleet dropped out of hyperspace, Commander Dominic Moreau knew the worst had come to pass. He stood on the bridge of the HMS Goliath, his eyes locked on the devastation unfolding before him. Alpha Omega 8 was gone. Where once biodomes shimmered beneath twin suns, only craters remained, blackened scars against the planet's charred surface. Wreckage drifted in low orbit, remnants of the colony's defense fleet torn apart like carrion left for scavengers. Massive plumes of smoke twisted into the upper atmosphere, the last remnants of human civilization turning to ash. Moreau's jaw tightened. They weren't fast enough. The distress call had reached them in time to act, but even at full speed they had arrived too late to save the colony. And yet, the battle was not over. "Commander, enemy vessel still active!" Lieutenant Cole Drayton barked from the tactical station. "The Varnax are regrouping in low orbit. They think they've won." "They haven't," Moreau muttered, clenching his fists. His gaze swept over the Varnax fleet, an array of serpentine warships, their sleek biomechanical hulls slithering through space like predatory eels. Their formation was shifting, adjusting, preparing for withdrawal. The bastards weren't even concerned about resistance. Then, suddenly, an urgent alert from the ship's scanners. "Commander," Lieutenant Drayton called, his voice tense. "Long-range bioscanners just picked up 2 human life signs, a drift and a damaged escape pod." Moreau turned sharply. "Where?" "Near the outer debris field, just beyond the station's wreckage." Drayton expanded the tactical display, and there it was. A battered 2-man escape craft, barely holding together, spinning slowly amid the wreckage. Its power was failing, the interior life support fluctuating. They wouldn't last long. Moreau's eyes narrowed. "Identify them." Drayton worked fast, feeding the data through the ship's systems. Seconds stretched into eternity before he looked up, eyes wide. "It's Lieutenant Donovan Garth and Officer Barry Osmond." A wave of relief, immediately replaced by urgency. Garth was alive, but not for long. Moreau turned to his crew. "Divert power to forward shields and cover that escape pod. I want fighters running interference. No Varnax gets near them." The Goliath surged forward, its weapons blazing, carving a path toward the drifting survivors. Moreau straightened. "Weapons primed?" "Locked and loaded," Drayton confirmed. Moreau's expression hardened. "All ships, open fire. Make them bleed." The HMS Goliath roared to life, its broadside cannons igniting the void in a brilliant display of firepower. The first salvo crashed into the Varnax fleet, tearing through their ranks like a reaper's scythe. Explosions bloomed in succession, engulfing enemy warships in violent bursts of flame and shrapnel. The Varnax, caught off guard, reeled from the onslaught. Their arrogance had betrayed them. The Goliath, flanked by 2 escort frigates, cut through the chaos like a blade, dodging incoming fire as plasma beams and railgun rounds carved through the darkness. Human gunners worked with ruthless efficiency, each shot tearing apart alien hulls, sending debris spiraling into the abyss. Amid the chaos, a rescue skiff launched from the Goliath, cutting through the battlefield under the protective cover of the ship's forward shields. As plasma fire rained from above, the Goliath's defensive barrier flared, a shimmering wall of energy absorbing the brunt of the explosions, shielding both the skiff and the drifting escape pod. The skiff's tractor beam locked onto the battered craft, stabilizing it mid-spin before reeling it into the docking hold with a resounding clang. Inside, warning lights flickered across the controls, oxygen levels critical, power nearly depleted, but the survivors were secured. Then, the enemy struck back. A Varnax warship swooped in, weapons primed to obliterate their prize. Drayton's voice cracked over the comms. "Varnax ship targeting the rescue team." Moreau didn't hesitate. "All batteries, focus fire on that ship. Wipe it out." The Goliath's cannons unleashed hell. Blazing energy tore across the void, slamming into the Varnax vessel before it could fire. The warship shuddered, its hull rupturing in a cascade of explosions. With one final surge, the skiff burned hard for the hangar, slipping safely into the Goliath's hull, just as another Varnax warship was reduced to a silent inferno. "Direct hits on multiple targets," Drayton reported. "Enemy formations breaking," Moreau smirked. "Good. Let them panic." The Varnax had never expected a counterattack this swift. Their once organized fleet fractured, vessels scrambling as their chain of command faltered. Some tried to regroup, others attempted to flee, but humanity was not in a merciful mood. Moreau's sharp gaze caught movement. A larger enemy ship, a Varnax war barge, limping away from the chaos. It was different, bulkier, heavily armored, pulsing with ominous energy. "If it's running, it's important," Moreau muttered. "Target that war barge. Full power." Drayton didn't hesitate. "Firing now." The Goliath's main cannons flared, launching a devastating barrage of railgun slugs and energy torpedoes. The war barge buckled, its twisted hull rupturing as secondary explosions burst from within. But before it could be completely destroyed, a pulse of sickly green energy surged from its core, a beacon. Moreau's exhaled sharply. A distress signal. "They're calling reinforcements," Drayton said grimly. Moreau's jaw clenched. "We can't let them regroup. Push forward. Wipe out what's left." The battle intensified. Varnax fighters swarmed like hornets, weaving through the carnage, desperate to escape. But human gunners held firm, pinpoint accuracy tearing through their formations. For the first time in the war, the Varnax were running. Aboard the Varnax cruiser, Commander Zalthar stood at the helm, his furious gaze locked onto the wreckage of his war barge, now nothing more than drifting debris. The humans had struck a devastating blow, and now their ship was closing in fast. His mandibles clicked in frustration as he snarled, "They're relentless! Prepare to engage hyperdrive!" Suddenly alarms blared around him. "They've locked onto our engines!" bellowed a subordinate. Moreau's eyes narrowed as he watched the crippled enemy vessel drift helplessly in the void. "This is our chance," he said coldly. "Secure that war barge! We're taking their commander alive!" The Goliath's docking clamps extended, attaching to the wounded enemy vessel. A squad of Marines surged into the breach, weapons drawn. Within moments, bursts of gunfire echoed through the comms, followed by the sharp hiss of alien screams. "Commander Moreau, we have him." The report crackled through the comms. "Bring him to the interrogation chamber," Moreau said coldly. "I want to know everything." Minutes later, the alien captain was brought before him, shackled and furious, though the signs of despair were laid deep across its fierce features. "We will not yield," Zalthar snarled, venom lacing his voice. "You may have won this battle, but your species will be wiped from existence." Moreau watched the Varnax commander carefully, noting the flash of madness in its eyes. "We're going to find out how many more of you are lurking out there, Zalthar. Activate the Veritas sphere." From a console, an advanced device shaped like an orb hummed to life. A Veritas sphere, an interrogation tool designed to extract truth through intense stimuli. Light shimmered across its surface, casting shadows that danced menacingly against the wall. Zalthar smirked. "You think your devices can break me?" "Let's find out," Moreau retorted, gesturing for the technicians to engage the device. The Veritas sphere whirred ominously, an energy pulsating like the heartbeat of a monster. As waves of energy rippled through the alien, Zalthar hissed in pain, his form jerking involuntarily. "No, I will not." "The truth, Zalthar," Moreau pressed, stepping closer, knowing time was of the essence. "Where is the rest of your fleet?" "Wretched vermin," Zalthar screeched, beginning to sway as the device tightened its grip. "There are more, a larger fleet. Location." Moreau's intensity was sharpened, not letting the moment slip away. "Close to the dying star, in the dark area, where communication is jammed." Zalthar gasped, his voice rasping under the relentless grip of the Veritas sphere. "A fleet, massive. They will obliterate the humans. We are merely a distraction." The Veritas sphere pulsed, its energy constricting like an unrelenting vice. Zalthar's bioluminescent markings flared wildly, his limbs trembling under the onslaught. His body arched, muscles taut with defiance, but he did not break. Instead, a guttural snarl tore from his throat as his markings blazed, energy rippling through him like a storm about to be unleashed. Then, with a violent surge, he ripped free. "Stop him!" Moreau barked. The guards moved instantly, weapons leveled, but Zalthar was already in motion. In a blur, he rolled onto his feet, his elongated limbs moving with an unnatural, predatory grace. His claws flexed, elongating, razor-sharp, gleaming under the interrogation lights. His amber eyes burned with savage triumph. But Moreau was ready. His sidearm was already raised, finger poised over the trigger. The guards mirrored his stance, weapons trained on the towering alien. One wrong move, and they would reduce him to nothing but a cautionary tale. For a heartbeat, the air between them stilled, a razor's edge of deadly anticipation. But Zalthar didn't attack. Instead, the Varnak's commander locked eyes with Moreau, defiance radiating from his towering frame. A final act of control. With a sharp, guttural hiss, Zalthar reared back, and in one swift, brutal motion, drove his own talons deep into his throat. Dark ichor spilled over his chest, pooling onto the cold metal floor. He swayed, his bioluminescent markings flickering erratically before dimming completely. A final hiss, a whisper of contempt escaping his lips, and then silence. His lifeless form crumpled to the ground. "Damn it," Moreau muttered, his fists clenching at his sides. They had their answer, but they could have learned so much more. A chance at deeper knowledge gone. But at least now, they knew where to strike. 30 minutes later, the HMS Goliath re-established communications with Admiral Nelson on board the HMS Havoc. A holographic display revealed the aftermath of the battle. "Commander Moreau," Nelson greeted, his stern face reflecting deep concern. "What's the situation?" "Admiral, we successfully repelled the Varnak's incursion, but Alpha Omega 8 is lost." Moreau's voice was steady, but the weight of the statement hung between them. "We intercepted their commander. Before his death, he revealed a much larger fleet is hiding near a dying star, jamming signals and preparing for a full-scale invasion." Nelson's jaw tightened. "We cannot allow that to happen. They must not reach any of the nearby colonies." Moreau's gaze darkened. This victory, if we can even call it that, was only possible because they underestimated us. They saw humanity as insignificant, unworthy of their full attention, and it cost them. But that mistake won't happen twice. His expression hardened. "Next time, they'll be ready. Nelson nodded, the weight of that truth settling over him. We need to gather more intelligence about their weapons, Moreau continued. We must understand how they breached our defenses so easily. Because if we don't, the next battle could be our last. You're right, Nelson admitted, a new resolve hardening in his gaze. I'll reach out personally to our ally on the Outer Rim. The Okar have intelligence on the Varnax Empire, and if there's any knowledge that can shift the tide in our favor, we need it now. And the fleet near the Dying Star? Moreau asked. Nelson's voice was iron. We'll prepare a strike, but before we commit, we need every piece of intelligence we can get. As the message dispersed, the flickering hologram dimmed, but the weight of the undertaking remained heavy on Moreau's shoulders. He exhaled sharply, his grip tightening. We will make them pay for Alpha Omega 8, he vowed under his breath, the fire of vengeance igniting in his heart once more. The war had truly begun, and humanity would not fall silently into the abyss. Aboard the Omega Command, suspended in the dark void of space, Admiral Christopher Nelson stood at the observation window, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. 60 years of war and diplomacy had shaped him. His short-cropped hair, streaked with salt and pepper, bore silent witness to the battles fought and burdens carried. A strategist through and through, he had commanded fleets in countless engagements, outmaneuvering pirates, rogue factions, and alien warlords. But never had he faced an adversary like the Varnax, an empire as ancient as the void itself. Centuries after the discovery of faster-than-light travel, humanity had expanded beyond Earth, carving out a fragile existence throughout the cosmos. Colonies stretched across multiple star systems, each one a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. From bustling trade hubs to isolated research outposts, these settlements formed the backbone of an interstellar civilization. Yet for all their progress, humanity was still young in the grand scale of the cosmos. As commander of Omega 45 Sector, the safety of the colonies rested on his shoulders, and now Alpha Omega 8, one of its largest settlements, was nothing more than a graveyard. His failure weighed on him, though he would never let it show. Nelson exhaled, his gaze locked on the cold abyss beyond the reinforced glass. This war was no longer about one colony, it was about survival itself. The station's sleek metallic contours glistened under the artificial lights, the atmosphere humming with purpose. A bustling crew moved around him, but his focus lay firmly ahead, anticipating the arrival of their Okar ally. The door slid open. Kovshar, an Okar dignitary, loomed in the doorway, his elongated frame almost skeletal in its grace. His dark blue skin shimmered with shifting bioluminescent lines, like living constellations flowing beneath his flesh. His large amber eyes glowed softly, filled with an intelligence acquired over centuries. Admiral Nelson, Kovshar greeted, his voice a deep, resonant timbre. I am pleased to be in your presence once more, despite the grim circumstances. Nelson straightened, forcing himself to focus. Kovshar, thank you for coming. I fear our need is dire. The Varnax have a pre-existing fleet hiding near a dying star, and we need information on their technology before we can engage them successfully. Your situation is grim, Kovshar said, his amber eyes narrowing. My people have studied the Varnax's capabilities extensively. Their weapons harness energy to destabilize defenses, while their biochemical projectiles erode biological resistance. However, their technology relies on sustained energy output rather than brute force. If disrupted at the right moment, it could compromise their shields. A biochemical weapon and a shield weakness. That's useful intel, Nelson noted, jotting it down. Indeed, Kovshar confirmed. Analyzing the wreckage of the captured Varnax cruiser may yield insights into their shield matrices and propulsion systems. Understood. Nelson tapped the console. Moreau, status on the survivors? Osmond and Garth are stable, sir. Medical teams are tending to them now. Nelson exhaled, relief flickering through his stern expression. Good. Report to the bridge immediately. Commander Moreau entered a moment later, standing at attention. Now, tell me about the captured Varnax ship. How soon can we use what we've learned? Nelson inquired. Dr. Leonard Graves has been coordinating with intelligence to reverse engineer Varnax technology. He is isolating key pieces of tech and extracting their schematics for our scientists to examine. If we can turn their weapons against them, it could significantly turn the tide of battle. Excellent. Inform him I need immediate updates, Nelson asserted. We will fortify our defenses and enhance our plasma weaponry. Send orders to all colonies to take shelter in their underground facilities until the threat has been neutralized. Moreau nodded and turned to relay the orders, intending to provide every colony the warnings they needed to prepare. He understood the urgency. Fear was a potent adversary during war. Admiral, Hfy spoke, his tone earnest. The Okar will support you with additional resources. We'll prepare our own fleet to aid you against the Varnax. Your success is vital for both of our races. Thank you, Hfy. We will not take this alliance lightly. With your help and the intelligence we gather, we will enhance our capabilities. We cannot allow the Varnax to descend upon our colonies unchallenged. With a decisive nod, Hfy stepped back. Then time is of the essence. I will contact my fleet. May the stars guide our paths. As Hfy departed, Nelson and Moreau turned their focus to preparations. On the edge of Omega Command, engineers toiled under blinding artificial lights, their voices blending into a constant hum of calculations, machinery, and urgency. The laboratory pulsed with energy, every technician moving with precision, some from duty, others from sheer fear of the man overseeing them. Dr. Leonard Graves was a legend in his field, and an absolute menace in the lab. His thinning gray hair was perpetually disheveled, his sharp features twisted into an expression of perpetual irritation. To Graves, interruptions were the true enemy of science. And right now, he was at war. Commander Dominic Moreau strode into the lab, moving past workbenches littered with exposed circuits and fragmented Varnax tech. What can you tell us, Graves? Moreau demanded. Graves let out a long, exaggerated sigh, not even looking up from the alien console he was prying open. Oh, I don't know, Commander, he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Maybe that our enemies, who have clearly outmatched us, built their shields with some kind of adaptive frequency modulation, or that their plasma weapons run hotter than anything we've ever seen. Or maybe, just maybe, that I'm working as fast as I can while you storm in here barking deadlines. Moreau arched a brow. And? Graves grumbled something under his breath, then spun a nearby terminal screen toward him, pointing aggressively. And I'm reversing their shield harmonics to find the optimal frequency to punch right through, and I'm integrating their energy conversion system into our plasma weaponry. If this works, we'll sever through their defenses like a hot knife through butter. His eyes gleamed with something dangerously close to excitement. Moreau folded his arms. How long? Graves groaned, rubbing his temples. I'd love to say when it's done, but I know you people don't believe in patience. He flicked a switch, watching as a modified energy coil crackled with alien energy. 10 hours, maybe less if everyone stops breathing down my neck. Moreau exhaled sharply, glancing toward the observatory where Admiral Nelson loomed, overseeing the war effort. We engage their fleet soon, Graves. Make it count. Graves waved him off with an irritated flick of his wrist. Yes, go do your military things and let me work. The Goliath and Havoc prepared to mobilize, flanked by Okar warships glowing like distant stars against the dark abyss. The hangars buzzed with activity, orders flowing like clockwork as soldiers and technicians worked tirelessly, exhaustion ignored in the face of what was to come. Shields were reinforced, weapons calibrated, and battle formations finalized. Humanity and its allies standing on the precipice of war. Aboard the Havoc, Nelson settled into his command chair, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. Every move, every decision had led to this moment. Prepare for hyperspace jump, he ordered, his voice steady, firm. Set course for the coordinates provided by the Varnax commander. The fleet stirred to life, energy cores humming as engines powered up. Nelson felt the weight of anticipation pressing down on them all. Somewhere beyond the darkness, the enemy lay in wait, unaware that, for the first time, they were not the hunters. "On my mark," he uttered into the tense silence. His eyes swept over the bridge crew, each face hardened with the same quiet resolve. This was not about survival anymore. This was war, and this time, humanity would strike first. High Commander Kirath of the Varnax fleet stood motionless aboard the flagship Darkness, his piercing eyes fixed on the tactical display. The ship, a monstrous silhouette in the void, pulsed with bioluminescence, its hull shifting like the hide of a living beast. Shadows flickered across the command center as the soft hum of the warship's systems intertwined with the silence of his officers, who dared not speak until addressed. The transmission had arrived moments ago, news of Zalthar's failure. Kirath let the words replay in his mind, his mandibles tightening in irritation. A Varnax commander captured by humans, allowing himself to be interrogated, to die like a caged animal? It was unthinkable. The disgrace of it burned hotter than any enemy weapon. He scoffed. Zalthar was weak. His failures meant nothing. Humans were nothing. A lowly species crawling through the void, desperate to claim the stars as their own, arrogant, fragile, fleeting. Kirath waved a dismissive claw, silencing the waiting officer. "The weak perish. That is the order of things. Zalthar served his purpose. Now we move forward." Yet, despite his outward dismissal, something about the human resistance nagged at him. How had they overwhelmed Zalthar's forces? The Varnax should have crushed them. The growing itch of unease was swiftly drowned beneath his unwavering confidence in Varnax superiority. Humans could not stand against them. No species could. And yet, why were there no bodies? Kirath's emerald scales shimmered under the reddish glow of the command center as an officer stepped forward, his voice uncertain. "High Commander, we have received final reports from the assaults on Braxton 5 and Paradis Eclipsia." The officer hesitated. "The colonies have been destroyed, yet confirmation remains the same. There are no bodies." Kirath's head snapped toward him, his slitted eyes narrowing. "What?" The officer stiffened. "Scans confirm 0 biological remnants. No human corpses, no Ocker bodies. Nothing." A murmur rippled through the gathered Varnax, their unease mounting. It was unnatural. A civilization reduced to rubble should leave behind the stench of the dead. Kirath's tail lashed once in agitation. Did they vaporize themselves in cowardice? Or has some parasite already fed on their remains? His voice dripped with mockery. The officer shook his head. "There are no signs of mass casualties, Commander. It's as if they were never there to begin with." A new anger burned in Kirath's chest. The humans had slipped through his claws. "They knew," he hissed under his breath. "They ran before we arrived." His mandibles flexed, grinding together in irritation. Pathetic. He turned toward his officers, eyes gleaming. "No matter. If they cower beneath the dirt like worms, we will bury them deeper." His voice hardened. "Send the next wave. Target Delta Prime and Thalos Ridge. Burn them to the bedrock." He slammed a fist on the console. "Let them witness the might of the Varnax." The darkness loomed over Delta Prime as the Varnax fleet surged forward, slipping through the abyss like silent reapers. Their warships, biomechanical and ominous, pulsed with eerie light as their weapons charged. On the surface, Delta Prime, a lush colony world home to thousands, remained blissfully unaware. Its towering hydro farms stretched toward the sky, untouched by war. Then the first energy beams lanced downward, shattering buildings in an instant. Panic erupted below as firestorms consumed the streets. Structures crumbled, metal melting like wax beneath the searing Varnax bombardment. The once thriving colony became a slaughterhouse, the night sky glowing with the embers of its ruin. The same horror unfolded on Thalos Ridge. A paradise once filled with golden fields and blue lakes now became a battlefield of flame and ruin. Bomb probes rained from above, their detonations sending shockwaves across the terrain. Kerath watched from his command chair, satisfaction curling in his chest as human structures collapsed like brittle bones. And yet, there was still no enemy resistance. "Commander," an officer called, his voice tinged with unease. "Our sensors detect no remaining life forms. Again." Kerath's satisfaction curdled into frustration. He leaned forward, eyes locked onto the battlefield below. "These creatures, they flee like vermin before we even arrive." His claws tapped against the console, his mind racing. Then, an idea struck him. If the humans refused to stand and fight, he would cut off their head. Kerath rose from his throne-like seat, his gaze burning with cold intent. "They run because they believe they have a chance to resist," he mused, "because their leaders still breathe." His mandibles curled in a predatory grin. He would take that from them. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered, his voice measured, lethal. "Set course for the humans' primary station, Omega Command." Murmurs rippled through the officers, their unease shifting into awe. Kerath was no longer targeting scattered colonies. He was about to strike the beating heart of humanity's war effort. "Let them feel the weight of inevitability," Kerath continued, his tone almost amused. "We will not simply crush them. We will shatter their ability to dream of victory." He turned toward his officers, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We will end them." A tremor ran through the darkness as proximity alarms screeched to life. Then, "Commander," a Varnax officer barked. "Unidentified ships emerging from hyperspace. Multiple contacts." Kerath whirled toward the viewport, his eyes narrowing as the void split apart. Flashes of white-hot light streaked across the darkness. Human warships, Okar crystalline vessels, a fleet. They surged through the black, engines flaring as they cut across the battlefield like an avalanche of fire and steel. Kerath's eyes blazed with sudden rage. How dare they? His mandibles clicked furiously. The HMS Goliath took point, its cannons roaring as it launched a devastating opening salvo. Okar warships followed, their crystalline beams carving into the Varnax line. Kerath snarled, slamming a fist on the console. "Raise shields! Engage!" The final battle had begun, but this time, the humans had come to strike first. The void trembled. From the bridge of the HMS Havoc, Admiral Christopher Nelson watched the battle unfold like a hellish storm, its chaos stretching across the dark abyss. Explosions flared in violent bursts, the corpses of shattered ships tumbling through the wreckage-strewn battlefield. The human Ocker coalition had arrived in full force, their warships weaving through fire as they clashed against the Varnax armada. "All ships engage at will," Nelson commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The Allied fleet surged forward. Plasma beams carved through the black, railguns unleashed firestorms, and missiles left blazing trails of vengeance in their wake. The Okar vessels, their crystalline hulls shimmering, moved like dancing specters of war, striking with efficiency. The Varnax, though caught off guard by the ferocity of the assault, responded with sheer brutality. At the heart of it all, the darkness loomed, a predator in the void. High Commander Kerath stood within its command chamber, his eyes narrowed in contempt as his forces adapted. "Crush them," Kerath snarled. "Make them drown in their own arrogance." The darkness's cannons roared, and the battlefield became an inferno. Seated in the command chair of the HMS Goliath, Commander Dominic Moreau clenched the console, his knuckles white as the ship convulsed under another devastating impact. Sparks erupted from overloaded systems, alarms wailed, and the deck groaned like a wounded beast, the ship's very frame protesting against the onslaught. "Shields failing!" Lieutenant Drayton shouted. "Multiple hull breaches. Deck 6 through 9 are gone." Moreau wiped blood from his forehead. He could taste copper, feel the ship's agony beneath his feet, but retreat? Not a chance. "We hold the line!" he barked, Redirect power to forward weapons. Make every shot count. The Goliath roared, railguns tearing into a Varnax warship, splitting it apart in a silent eruption of flame. The bridge crew erupted in a fleeting cheer until the darkness turned its full attention toward them. Moreau saw it too late. Incoming. The darkness's primary cannon unleashed a singular searing beam of destruction. It slammed into the Goliath's side, ripping through the hull like paper. The ship buckled. Fire. Screams. The world blurred. Moreau coughed, his body pinned by debris. Smoke filled his lungs. Heat blistered his skin. The sounds of his dying crew echoed around him, distant, fading. "Commander!" Drayton crawled toward him, blood smeared across his face. "Escape pods!" Moreau shook his head. No time. His gaze flickered to the tactical display. They needed time. The Varnax were adapting, pushing forward. If they broke the human line now, Omega Command would fall. "Drayton," Moreau's voice was hoarse, steady. "Get whoever you can off this ship." "That's an order." Drayton's face twisted in grief. "Sir!" Moreau gripped his arm. "Go!" His strength was fading, but his will remained. Drayton hesitated. Then, with one last look at his commander, he stumbled toward the emergency hatch. Moreau exhaled, the weight of command slipping from his shoulders. There was one more thing to do. The Goliath was dying, its hull buckling under relentless fire, but he wasn't about to let it be for nothing. With a final push, he gripped the failing controls, forcing the crippled ship into a desperate charge. Engines burned at their limits, flames licking through fractured panels as the HMS Goliath hurled itself toward the darkness. Through the shattered viewport, Moreau could see it, the monstrous flagship of the Varnax, looming like an executioner. He gritted his teeth. Not today. Not without a fight. "Brace for impact," he murmured, knowing none of his crew remained to hear him. The darkness filled the screen. Then, a final shuddering groan from the Goliath as its reactor core ruptured. A blinding white-hot explosion consumed everything. Dominic Moreau was gone. Nelson watched in horror as the Goliath made its final charge. On the Havoc's bridge, the tactical display flickered, overwhelmed by the sheer energy output of the doomed ship's core. Through the viewport, he saw it, a blazing comet of wreckage, tearing through the void, aimed straight at the darkness. "No," he breathed, his grip tightening around the railing. A heartbeat later, the Goliath struck. The explosion ignited the void, a white-hot inferno swallowing the Varnax flagship in its wake. The shockwave hammered through the battlefield, sending debris spiraling in all directions. Nelson barely felt the force against his ship. His focus was on the light, on the place where Dominic Moreau had stood just moments ago. And now, nothing. The bridge was silent, the crew stunned into stillness. Nelson forced himself to stand straighter. There was no time for grief. He clenched his jaw, eyes locked on the remnants of the battle still raging. "Keep fighting," he commanded, forcing the agony down. "Moreau gave us a chance. We will not waste it." Across the battlefield, Okkar ships fell, their crystalline bodies shattered by relentless enemy fire. The humans were holding, but barely. And on board the darkness, Karath saw his opening. The darkness was in flames, its biomechanical hull ruptured and spilling volatile energy into the void. Wounded, but not dead, it limped forward, engines flickering, its jagged silhouette still cutting through the chaos of battle. It was dying, but it would not die alone. If it reached Nelson's fleet, if it could deliver one final blow, it would drag the humans and the Okkar down with it. Nelson saw it, felt the weight of what was coming. Moreau had given his life to cripple that monster, and still, it pushed forward, his fists clenched, fury roaring in his chest. "All ships, focus fire on the darkness. Stop that ship at all costs." The response was immediate. Human and Okkar vessels pivoted, weapons flaring to life, plasma lances, railgun rounds, missile salvos. Every ship poured fire into the wounded flagship, hammering it with unrelenting fury. Armor ruptured, shields failed. The darkness convulsed, explosions ripping through its core, and yet it kept going. Like a wounded predator refusing to collapse, it lunged forward, dragging a trail of debris and dying light in its wake, its final course locked onto Nelson's command fleet. Nelson's voice was a war cry. "Hit it again!" But Karath refused to die. Then a final barrage from the Havoc found its mark. A torpedo punched through the darkness's core, igniting a chain reaction. Fire erupted from within, consuming the last remnants of the High Commander's ambition in a violent inferno. Silence settled over the wreckage-strewn void. Twisted metal drifted aimlessly through the abyss. No more enemy signals, no more threats. For the first time since the battle began, they were alone. Nelson stood on the Havoc's bridge, his face carved in stone as he surveyed the ruins. The price had been paid in blood. Moreau was gone. Thousands were lost, but the enemy had been wiped out. A transmission crackled to life. An Okkar commander. "It is done." His voice was solemn. "The Varnak's fleet is destroyed." Nelson exhaled, his shoulders heavy. They had won. But the war was not over. The Varnaks were still out there. More would come. Stronger, smarter, more prepared. He turned to his crew, their faces weary yet defiant. They had survived, and now they would prepare. "Send word to every colony," Nelson ordered. "Tell them, it's over." We held the line. As the remnants of the battle drifted into the abyss, Nelson clenched his fists. Today, they had won. But tomorrow, they would find allies, and they would be ready for war. Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, and one last thing. Every great soldier knows that to survive and become a hero, taking care of yourself is key. So before you go, check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's important. And I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.